evening, everybody. I hope everyone is well. It's lovely to see you all. This is the first one of this term, and Kate and I were just reflecting. It seems a while since we've done one, but it's only probably about 3 weeks. But it seems like quite a long while, so we feel like we're out of practice. So bear with us. I think you all know the spiel now, but I'll run through it anyway. So welcome to Heads Up. As you know, Heads Up is a sort of fairly large and increasingly large network. With its main focus is to support head teachers and provide support for head teachers, and we do that through one-to-one coaching. We do it through our Wednesday evening and Saturday morning support sessions. We also have a buddying system that Kate has set up, which is absolutely fantastic to pair head teachers up together. And increasingly, we're doing work through local authority areas. So we've got a project running in Oxfordshire, we've got one about to launch in Warwickshire, and we've got about 18 other local authority areas that we're doing bespoke support for Heads Up. The network is now what we describe as active membership. It's around 500. Passive membership is around 3,000. And you know, we are there very much to support head teachers, not just because of the pandemic, but because we recognise that as former school leaders ourselves, it's a challenging job, it's a stressful job. It's the best job in the world, but it also comes with all sorts of other baggage that comes with it. And we think that it's really important that head teachers have intentional support and have spaces where they can be their authentic and genuine selves. And we also think that there are very few of those spaces that exist in the system. So that's what Heads Up is all about. That's what we try to do. And every alternate Wednesday, we partner alongside one of our partners is Big Change. And Big Change are a wonderful organisation that fund all sorts of social activities across the country, and they're really looking to sort of drive big changes in society, but also through education. And Big Change are one of our partners, and they published a manifesto for education. Must be coming up now, about 15, 16 months ago. And we really like that manifesto. That manifesto sort of rings true to the values of the whole of the Heads Up network and the work that we do. And there's a real sort of synergy there. So we decided that what we wanted to do was provide a space every alternate Wednesday where head teachers and leaders in the system and passionate educationists could come together and they could talk about the elements of that manifesto. And we're now, can't quite believe it, we're now on number 6. Number 6 is the one that we are doing. Multiple pathways through learning and into work are valued and supported. And so the theme is that this evening's conversation is how can we change the education system to enable our young people to have a choice of pathways through education, and how can we challenge the paradigm whereby most of our young people are pushed towards A levels, most of our young people are pushed towards universities, and that's presented to them as the pathway. Alternative pathways are presented as a sort of second choice because maybe for whatever reason they haven't been able to get to university. We think that should be challenged in a world which is rapidly changing, in a context in our world whereby children are going to be working for longer, young people are going to be working for longer than they've ever done before, they'll be living for longer than they've ever done before, they're probably going to have multiple career pathways. The world of work is going to change beyond all recognition over the course of the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years as they're doing that work. That actually we need to be thinking about how we present alternative pathways to our young people. And that's what tonight we want to hear from you, as we always do. We want to hear what you think. So that's what tonight is all about. I'm absolutely delighted that we're joined this evening by Rianne, who is an employment solicitor and is really passionate about this area and about pathways through education and learning. And we're also joined by Joe from Communicolor, who is equally passionate about it. And they're gonna provide our inputs and our provocations this evening. And so, without further ado, Joe, I think I'm going to come to you first.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome, Joe, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, so my thinking around it all, first of all, for me, it very much goes back to the beginning of the students as soon as they start education and that curriculum planning. So in terms of the progression and the sequence that builds up, it's very much, for me, I really encourage staff to think about the curriculum framework and incorporating and weaving in careers, so CIEG, very carefully. But then obviously opportunities as it scaffolds and builds up for students to explore and look at different qualifications that might be needed and necessary for those different options. And so, you know, we always say one size doesn't fit all. And, you know, when I have been in front of the classes over the years in my career, you know, the students, that they're a human being and they're not a number, and they all have different skill sets and abilities, and it's very much about educating the students and giving them the exposure to different careers, but then the different pathways, and giving them the opportunity. So very much, for example, you know, when it gets to Key Stage 4, not having just that, you know, the EBAC group, all students, you know, they want to do that, even if you know, they've got the potential and the ability. Second of all, giving them the opportunities for the vocational, and you've got your BTEC progression. So, and again, the options there in site early on, not when it gets to the crunch of it, but regarding not just going, we also talked about a minute ago, James, but not just you know, they have to go to university. Is there other options and avenues that they can progress through? And again, it's about educating them early doors, very much a supportive measure. And again, like your apprenticeships. And one of the things that I'm wrapped around at the minute up here in Leeds is very much in terms of this topic. So we have several SEMH schools, and one of the big gaps here, and it's not just up here, but I think in the country, is that next step. So when students finish Key Stage 4 and they go on to post 16, the options there in terms of, you know, what is out there. So as it stands at present, I'm actually developing a post 16 platform provision where students actually coming from our SEMH schools are having, it's in the middle of going to a mainstream college, large college here, and they're having the exposure once a week where they can go there, where it's nurtured and it's very sensitively approached, but then also having the world of work. So what we're doing is we're building in and incorporating opportunities for them to actually build relationships with local businesses, working as well, but building up those fundamental life skills, which is transferable into any industry, but then giving them that platform where once they have completed the 2-year course, they've got an insight into what it's like in a really large mainstream college with thousands of students there, where it's not as daunting. They might want to then progress on to going on to an apprenticeship or the next stage, which will be a level 3 for them. Or they may want to then do that and aspire then to go to uni, or it might be that they get an apprenticeship with the links that they've formed through the course. So it's just very much, it's really, really important that there is a lot of different opportunities to cater for the different needs of the young people. So I hope, yeah, in your answer to your question, yeah, I think very much going back to it is this very much about careers and building that early on, that framework, right from primary school as well, and it's built up. So in terms of that, and it coincides then with the pathways, the options there. So when you go on to choosing the Key Stage 4 as well, because I know from historically, for when I was growing up, even though I went to a lovely school, I loved school, actually looking back now, and that's why I'm really passionate about this, is I never had that insight or the layer of support from school. And it was an outstanding school, but it wasn't in that respect where I didn't have a clue what pathways to take, what I needed, and I didn't have that layer. And so very much now, whilst I'm supporting my colleagues driving through their curriculum framework, I'm really trying to make it where it's not a tick box exercise, it's meaningful and it has that impact for the students. And then they think very carefully about what options are out there for the students from Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5, and so forth.
Yeah, and I think you know, the notion of sort of, I suppose, careers advice that you're sort of bringing us back to, and how that's presented in schools, secondary schools in particular. But you know, this and how richly we are able to present that with the resources that we have available to, and how we can then seek support from the community around us to make sure that we do enrich it and we add further value to those conversations for young people. Because actually, you know, even you know, in the best schools who do careers really well, and actually ultimately there is a limit to what you can present and how you can present it to young people. You know, the teachers who are doing that advice have got limited experience themselves, and you know, I think it's adding that value to young people's experiences with, I say, through presenting different choices. I didn't choose. I mean, a lot of people in the room here, you know, I was describe myself as an accidental teacher. I fell into it at the age of 26. You know, actually for the, you know, for all of that period of my life, from, you know, when you first become really conscious of the need to, at some point you're going to have to go out and work. So I'd say from sort of 12, 13, you know, right the way through to the age of 26, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. You know, they'll sort of stumble through, and actually that's you know, and I think one of the key things for me is about the messages that we give to our young people in school. And I'd sort of talk as a former head of sixth form, you know, who was, you know, really passionate about children being at sixth form and having a variety of courses that children could follow in their sixth form experience, not just the academic ones, but actually always having this sort of nagging doubt as an early leader in the back of my head that we were sort of spinning a bit of a lie to our kids. And actually we're not being massively honest. You know, the kind of the mantra of go to university, get a really good university degree, your career earnings will be much higher than they are for other people. You know, actually, a lot of that, the data does not support that at all. Now, that's not to say it's not true for some young people and some courses, but actually, like everything, we should be presenting them with a much broader and a much richer view of the careers pathways available to them.
I was going to just add to that as well, James, just that stigma, which we're saying, Kate, the stigma associated with vocational, certainly it was very much present when I was younger as well, and it still obviously is still around, but it's improving. But I think just linking up in terms of what I'm really passionate about and having those business partnerships where you've got local entrepreneurs and those high aspirations where you actually have people who've really been successful, but not just in entrepreneurs, but in any, you know, various professions, but actually early doors, having them come in and doing talks and about their journey, and actually did they go down the vocational route and look actually where they've got to in that journey, and also involving community parents and carers very much in that prior to them making decisions about the pathways at Key Stage 4 and 5. So I think it's really important to bring in real, you know, real life experiences from people who have been really incredibly successful and aspirational. So yeah.
Totally agree. And I can see that the sort of chat's picking away in the background. I'm trying to keep track of that as well. But you know, we're probably a small enough number this evening where we can just open it up to the floor. And has anybody got anything that they want to add or reflect on, or a question that they want to ask? TJ, straight in there.
Yeah, can I just add to that, right? I mean, I was typing away, but I thought let me just say it since you're giving me the opportunity. But look, I think exactly just following up what she just said, but in terms of like kind of giving children opportunities, I think LinkedIn should definitely be a part of that. I think, yes, it's very important to bring speakers in, but why aren't we teaching children like how to like do their research on LinkedIn, follow the big major companies, hang out in the same places as them, and see if those kind of industries are right for them? You know, and I think we expect children to know like what they want to do, go to university, get a degree, and they end up in 40, 50 grand debt without like any job security. Why aren't we telling them like and showing them like the ways that they can do research in the industries they want to go into? And I think LinkedIn has over 600 million people on it. Why aren't we using that? It's a free tool, you know?
Oh, I live by it. Absolutely live by it.
I live on it.
Me too. We'll have to connect. Yeah.
And Colin, if I perhaps just bring you in, because we had a chat earlier on today about the brilliant work that you do in Doncaster, you know, with children in the alternative provision, and you're dealing with sort of younger children. But you know, is there an element of this that resonates with you, that you know we've got these younger children and they've, you know, some of them have got behavioural issues, some of them have got other issues, it's sort of society-focused issues, that actually the presentation of there is this one path to follow. And I know, you know, you work hard against that, but is there anything you'd like to add?
A couple of things. I think the first thing is that they do see themselves as being failures because they don't conform to a particular route into, you know, what it means to be post-16. And post-16 means A levels, and then it means degree. And if you're not doing that, and actually You know, I remember actually, even before I was doing this, when I was quite in a mainstream school, having to go and advocate for a child who wanted to finish his AS and go and work in a local garage, because that's what he wanted to do. And he's incredibly successful doing that, because his brother had been at university. That was what the family saw as being the route. I think the other danger we have is I think that we're asking families to kind of get behind a situation which is quite fearful for them. I mean, when we were in Yarmouth putting our free school together, you know, and this idea was that the children want to go to university. What you're actually saying to the family is, we're going to take away someone that would be otherwise bringing money into the household, which enables you to actually pay your bills and keep food on the table. And we're going to take them away from that to go to university and come back with tens of thousands of pounds worth of debt in the future. You know, while at the same time, which was really sad, negating the fact that within sort of like a stone's throw of the school we were setting up, you've actually got a huge amount of renewable energy and new businesses. I mean, there's a company in Yarmouth that make a sensor that goes on the bottom of wind turbines, also on the spaceship. They're one place in the world that makes this, and the people in the town don't understand that's what's on their doorstep, because they're not seeing, you know, vocational routes as being an equivalent. And I think for too long we've had, and we do it, you know, we do it the same in education. We see a vocational route as being, that's what the kids who aren't successful in academia is doing, rather than actually recognizing the fact that there's some god awful academic teaching and provision, and there's some really good academic teaching. And it's the same with vocational stuff. There's no reason why it shouldn't be at the higher level. I think what's interesting about the way that Big Picture works in the States, and we're working with the Key Stage 4 people here in Doncaster. We're not actually doing Key Stage 4 at the moment. We will get into it another way, is they do a lot of internship work, which isn't a kind of a 2-week sheep dip work experience. It's a much more longer term. So developing what you're talking about, Joanna, in terms of actually doing the skill set that's needed and understanding the world of work, understanding the place. And in some of that, it's actually understanding that it's not for you. So actually what you can do is you can not end up doing, okay, you get to a college course at 16 because you think you want to be a plumber, or you want to be a beautician, or you want to go into healthcare. And then you realize 6 weeks in, it's not really what you thought it was. So actually really getting the information to, so by the time you're making those decisions, you know what it is. And I think that kind of, you know, one of the things we have to do, and it's come up a couple of times, you know, and I know a few people have said it, we have to actually kind of recognize that we've been successful in one way. And I think we have our own biases, as James has hinted at in that. And actually, we need to make sure that we can find other ways of doing it. And what's interesting is to other countries, though, in some places in kind of, I know Scott went with the BPL, to people in India and in Africa and things like that, and they will actually say the girls will go and do hairdressing. And it's a very sort of stereotypical route into education for some of the families. And actually what they're saying, well, actually hairdressing is science. So why don't you become a research scientist as well? So it's the flip side in some areas as well, is recognizing that, you know, what you're looking at in terms of going and doing, working with your dad as a bricklayer, as my dad was, you know, going on to the plumbing thing, actually you can turn it into your own business and the entrepreneurship and stuff around that as well. So I think we do both really, you know, we kind of push into one direction, and it shuts down the opportunity for others. But at the same time, in some of the kind of the other routes, if you like, we could do a better job of showing what that could be, that it's not necessarily a second choice to university or whatever.
And I think there is something, obviously Rianne's got a hand up, but I think there is something in that about, and we've talked about this in some of the other hopes for it, but there's something in it, I think, about the sort of class system in this country, and, you know, some very historical kind of links to the past about the way that our society is organized, and, you know, the value. And I can't help thinking there is a sort of, there's a sub agenda here, which is around the, you know, the social mobility agenda, which we've talked about in here before. That I find, you know, something, you know, somebody who was sort of brought up on a council estate in Bromsgrove, you know, I kind of find something really deeply uncomfortable about, because I think that you know, the university path is perceived as the path away from your community. And I think, you know, we need to be challenging that, saying actually the, you know, the value that we're talking about young people who bring value to the world around them, then actually they can do that in their community and within their community, with the employers in their community. They don't have to be extracted from that community to do that. And I'd say it's not one or the other, it's not oppositional, but it's recognizing that all of the spectrum that sits in between that is also a possibility, rather than just presenting this one sort of, you know, become socially mobile, leave your community behind, go to university, you know, the sort of dream that we spin, the fairy tale that we spin to lots of our young people, I think is underpinning it. Rianne, you wanted to come in on that point.
Yeah, just briefly to say that, so briefly, I just explain my background. I'm employment lawyer for 20 years, who's kind of fallen out of love with it. And I think there's potentially a reason for that, which is that I grew up in the South Wales Valleys and moved to London. And basically, because I was a high achiever in my school, I was kind of told, you're a high achiever, you're a girl, you need to be a focus for us so you can become a lawyer or a medic. I fainted at the sight of blood, so I became a lawyer. And actually now I've had my children, my priorities have very much changed, and it's not floating my boat anymore. And I've always been involved in education in one way or another. And I'm interested, I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old myself. So I'm interested in how the bigger picture and the world of work can help enable and facilitate children in the long term to not be in the position that I'm in. And which I find myself not alone in with a lot of my peers.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's two career paths that sort of stuck in my head as a completely, if I'm honest, completely lost 15, 16-year-old. And I'd be interested in other people's career experiences. We might go around the room and do that in a minute. Actually, how did you land where you are at the moment? You know, but the first one, my first work experience placement at the age of 14, I kind of had this vague idea that I wanted to be an accountant. I'm definitely not accountant material. And you know, accountants brilliant, do a great job. I was literally the first hour of being in this accountancy office in Worcester. No, that's definitely not for me. I then thought, when I went to university, I thought I was going to be a research scientist. Also not for me. You know, and I think it's that point about you have to try stuff. You know, you have to go and give stuff a go to find out what's right for you and what's not right for you. And the thought that you can make that decision at the age of sort of 13 or 14 with some information in a book or on a piece of paper, you know, I'm going to define the next 60 years of my life off the back of that reading. It's when you think about it, it's just completely illogical. But you know, I think I'm on career number, I suppose, 4 or 5 now. It'll be interesting going around the room. You know, where are people? You know, are you now sat in your house? Are you doing the thing that you set out to do when you were 14 or 15? Let's take quick reflections around the room. Jasmine, are you doing the thing at the moment that you set out to do as when you did your options choices at school?
Right. So let me tell you about me. It's very much slight tragedy and a slight kind of maneuver. I had a very Asian father who wanted us to be a doctor, lawyer, accountant. And then I went to the LSE. I'm not showing off. I'm just telling you where my career has been. Went to the LSE, and to please my father, decided to be an accountant and went for an apprenticeship style top accountancy firm. Ended up in the last 5 shortlisted, and they asked me what my interest was, and I said I liked laughing, and that didn't go down too well, so they rejected me. And then I kind of fluffed my way through a summer play scheme job, and I actually ended up loving it. And I thought, oh my gosh, you get paid for this? And so I had to tell my father, and I had 2 places at the College of Law. I had to tell my father, who cried crocodile tears, that I want to be a teacher. And he wept crocodile tears. Why do you want to be a teacher? Anyway, the 1990s, I don't know, this is how old I am. It was really hard to have a law degree and become a teacher, and you need a relevant subject. I had to really beg for my place at Goldsmiths, and they asked me, why would I want to be a teacher and not a lawyer? And I said, well, look, if you're a lawyer, you deal with the problems afterwards. And if you're a teacher, you try to preempt them. And I think that's what got me in. And then 5 years ago, to be honest, I went through a series of bereavements. And I had to, one of them was my 15-year-old daughter had her best friend die and collapse in front of her, and I had to look after her. And I had to sit there and think, what can I do to focus on my family? And it was just, all I did was I went to funerals. That's all I did. 2016, I just went to funerals after funerals. And then I sat there and I thought, and I read an article on LinkedIn called How to Create a CV of Life and Not a Corporate CV. And it resonated with me. And I came across a concept called Ikigai. And Kate, I saw you had a meeting about Ikigai. And I thought, I remember thinking, and the reason why I'm here in this group is just because I've moved to local authority or I work for the DFE doesn't mean that you can't support head teachers. and doesn't mean that you can't act with integrity and you can't reach out. And the way I work with local authority at Islington, or whether I'm on the DFE teacher panel deciding whether a teacher should be struck off, it's about, has that person been given every opportunity to succeed? And trust me, people shoot you down when you're acting as the expert, and it's like, no, he should be struck off or whatever. And you're going, no. What's the mantra here? We need to make sure that maxim is, has that person been given every opportunity to succeed? And you drill down. And yes, I've made decisions where I've, said that teacher needs to go under prohibition or whatever. But that's the story. And the thing is that I want to say to people here is, whatever job you do, wherever you are, whoever you are, reaching out is still key. And if somebody comes to me and wants to reach out or connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll still be there, because that's what we do as educators, right? So yeah, that's where my dodgy experience is. And now I'm doing what I do. I became a foster carer because I remember thinking in 2016, if I'm as lost as somebody out there, then I want to give back. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with, quite a funny story, is when my foster daughter was told that she was going into care, she was 12 years old, and the social worker told her she was going to go into care till 18. And they asked her, what tools do you need in order to succeed? And she said, I need hope. And that makes me feel really sad. So yes, that's my journey. That's me.
Jasmine, thank you for that. You've made me well up now, so I'm going to struggle to talk. That's and hope. We are Heads Up, and we are forever hopeful. So that's a lovely sort of background. Does anybody else want to share their career path? Does anybody else want to sort of give us where are you now and how did you get there, Chris?
Yeah, I wanted to reflect on my experience and then just chip into some of the things that have been said in the chat. I'm pointing at the chat there, by the way, in case you.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, bizarre. I still put Tipex on the screen as well. I went to a very traditional boys' Catholic grammar school, and Jasmine's made me smile then when she said it's showing her age that these things happened in the 90s. Well, this was in the 70s, and we did nothing but academia, and we didn't do it very well either. The teachers were an interesting bunch. So I had no careers education, and it reflected in the fact that until I was, I don't know how old, I was clueless about what I wanted to do. I had vague hopes of being a journalist, but did nothing about it. And I think then certainly drifted into teaching. It was something that I wanted to avoid because my mum did it. But I did it anyway. And I gripped onto it in the end because of a lot of the kind of worthy things really about wanting to influence people's lives and move them on and make changes and all that kind of stuff, which has been very rewarding, which is fine. But what was wrong with me fundamentally, in my view, was that I lacked any kind of positive mindset. I wasn't creative in my thinking about what I should do. I waited for other people to tell me because I was a good Catholic boy. I wasn't entrepreneurial in any way. And I don't mean about money making. I mean about having ideas and pushing them and shaping and being inventive in that sense. And I really think, reading what was in the chat, that's something that I would really want to stress as part of what children cover. I started by writing down that it was skills based, and it probably is, but it isn't that vague really. I mean, we're incredibly creative as a nation. You only got to look at our music industry and our TV industry and film and engineering and all sorts of things. And so many of the people I know did really, really well, but didn't do very well at school. And we're missing something. I think a lot of what was said, what Joanna was talking about, and certainly what Colin, again, we've had a lot of chats about, is really around that area, I think, about that character development and encouraging people to follow their own path and having the confidence in that. And I think, I'd really want to, if I had my time again, as it were, that I wish I'd be more confident and not fear making mistakes, even to the point when, and just to finally shut up, one of the things that depressed me about teaching in the schools that I was in, almost to a person of the children I've taught over the years, and a lot of them were A-level. They were terrified of making mistakes, and that was all that mattered. So they're marking in their books. It was about what score did I get, what did I get wrong, you know, and I think that has got to be a change in mindset for us all in schools, I think. And there's so many people out there who agree already, which is great, but I'd like to see quite a concerted effort on that, because otherwise you're still back to the tests and you're still back to the traditional ways of doing things. And I would stand up and say I am a victim of that system.
Yeah, I think I'd be inclined to agree with you from my own perspective, Chris, as well. But you know, this is hopes for Ed, so we've got the power to change it.
Yeah,
so we've got the power to do something about it. So I suppose what do we perceive the world changing into over the next sort of like 8-9 years? And I was on a conference with Jim Knight was the keynote speaker at a conference on Monday evening, and you know, he was talking about you know, the way that employment changes, the work that he does, how the employment world is going to change, and actually how people are going to recruit is changing. So you know, Joe's referenced LinkedIn. But actually increasingly sort of artificial intelligence based interviewing, which is focused on your values and your qualities and your skills. And actually increasingly for those large multinational big global companies, qualifications are going to become not interested. Actually, we want to know about you. And increasingly what's interesting is that, you know, Jim was talking about the fact that some of the big employers, PwC, are pulling out of the traditional recruitment rounds in universities, the milk rounds. They're pulling out of them because actually they want to get the children younger than that. They want them before they've been through that process and they've been processed in that way, so that they can actually shape them, and you know, to be values aligned employees that are doing the work that they want to do. So that's probably a fairly good point at which to hand over to Rian. Who might be able to add to that or add a different perspective. Rian, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So my background is law, but in a very varied way. So I'm not your traditional lawyer in the sense that I started off in private practice in South Wales. I moved to London, went to a city firm, went to a trade union firm, really couldn't find my fit, ended up in the charity sector as a lawyer for 15 years, which effectively means that if you work for a large charity, you're in a corporate. So I was working in the management team of 2 rather large corporates, seeing the pressures of the outside changing landscape. I was within the HR department latterly, so I saw the recruitment models, the growth models, all the different things. And I also had to deal with all the issues, the employment legislation coming in, and also the employment legislation conflict. So the ER issues that I had to deal with on the basis of personal people that I knew, mainly that I worked with in the big organization. So they were real people and it was the human touch. And I think I landed there predominantly because my values are make a difference. And so I'm not your traditional lawyer. I don't like billable hours. I do work as a consultant now, but I work very much on a choice basis. So I work with entrepreneurs and brands as well as individuals. I also advise schools and teachers. I'm a trustee of Mind, so of my local Mind, which the Mind network has local minds. So I'm a trustee with a local area which I live in, because I believe in well-being, and I believe in equipping people to deal with the pressures and strains of everyday life, whatever they may be, because we all have them. They're going to be challenges that we have in life, and I think that the earlier you can equip people to deal with those, the better. And I've seen that through my own personal experience. My mum was a teacher. She left the profession early, I think, probably due to burnout. She was very much a give-in teacher, and she was in the educational sector of the last government of dealing with life skills. So she was a home economics teacher. And actually, for me, that was the epitome of real life learning. So she ran the lessons and taught all of that. But from that, I never wanted to become a teacher either. So we have that side of things. But yet I find myself passionate about education sector and finding it fit for work as well as fit for life. And I think they're two different things, but they're also entwined. So picking up on the point that James brought, which is what are kind of employers and employers of the future looking for? And I think there's 2 things here that I have seen and also want to bring to the table. One of them is general around last year. So if you had talked to recruiters, if you talk to CEOs, management teams, and general people who recruit on a daily basis, what they were looking for. They would basically say, this is the skills I want for my role, and et cetera, et cetera. Then the pandemic hit, and absolutely everybody wanted flexibility and adaptability, because unless you had flexibility and adaptability, you couldn't have anybody doing their job. So actually overnight, we found a fantastic example of how the world was adapting around us, and us as people needing to catch up. So that's the one thing. The second thing is, what do we find ourselves in the beginning of this year? So talking to CEOs, recruiters again, and individuals that I work with, resilience. So it's the resilience that we still find ourselves in that position, but actually we're now, whether you're in a role or you're looking for a role, you've got to be resilient. And effectively that for me comes into the well-being aspect of it. You need to look after yourself, and you need to equip yourself with a toolkit to understand what your pressures are, what your alleviating tactics are to overcome those pressures, and how you can go on dealing with the everyday challenges of life in whatever aspect they are. So from that point of view, that's what I think that recruiters are looking for in the last year and this year, but actually it's much wider than that. So you touched upon, James, and also Chris, in terms of the future, what we're looking at. We're very much looking at 85% of jobs that our pupils now are going to go into don't exist. I mean, that's the figure that is bandied around. So what does that mean? That means A, they're going to have to be adaptable, and B, they're going to have to be transferable skills, because essentially you need to work your way through the landscape of change around you. So there needs to be that flexibility, but there also needs to be the communication skills, which we've seen over the last year. People have needed to adapt to Zoom. They've needed to adapt to having telephone conversations, more on email, but also that face-to-face when necessary. So there's a big kind of spectrum of communication skills, and a major one I think that we need to concentrate on is listening. So listening, you can actually learn a lot, and have that curiosity to ask the questions, the right questions, and you see that in employment so much, or at least in general employment, but it's not something that's brought out as a skill. It's just an assumed. It's assume you will listen. It will assume you ask the questions. Sometimes people say you ask too many questions, but I work on the basis there's no silly questions. A question's a question. So in that sense, the pervasive things are the skills that are going to be transformational and transferable. So those two words I think are really important. If we do look to the future, there is going to be automation. We're already seeing systems in place. We're already seeing robots doing things and computers doing things that everyday people would once do. They haven't got the human touch. So actually, what is the education that we should be educating our kind of young people with is the human touch. What is it that they have as a strength? What is it as they have that benefits and brings out value to the world? And more, I'm getting employers saying to me, and from personal experience, it's what do you bring to the table, and how can you show off your own values and your own confidence? And confidence is a big thing, actually. Not overconfidence, not arrogance, but the confidence in your innate ability of being able to do something and do it to the best of your ability. And initiative, so the executive functioning skills, the organizational skills, they're also very, very important in a world where things are going to be systematically done. So you have to have those organizational skills. But predominantly, I think the major thing is that looking forward, we need to equip children with emotional intelligence and young learners with the emotional intelligence and the human touch. And I take some examples that I can share with you, which is, so I worked latterly in a large charity, which you go on LinkedIn and you'll probably see. But and most of the issues that I dealt with were proactive to bring in organizational change, to bring in the bigger picture, to make organizations fit for the future. But essentially what that meant was bringing in people to work in collaboration, to teamwork for the one goal, and whatever that was, everybody had to buy into it. If you didn't buy into it, you wouldn't be doing the best for yourself or the best for the organization. So that comes into it too. It's about understanding what that goal is and understanding how you contribute to the bigger picture. So there's that ripple effect as well. And I think that as an employment lawyer, what I saw more and more was the disputes that came up were the lack of communication skills, the misunderstanding, the interpretational difficulties, or the lack of the emotional intelligence. So somebody couldn't read the room, they couldn't read the situation, and they just played it completely wrongly. And ultimately, you end up in a potential tribunal system. You end up with people hating each other. You end up with bad will rather than bad goodwill. And ultimately, you end up with a system where the people aren't getting on, which means that the objectives aren't being met. And ultimately, you're not in the situation where you're going forward either for yourself or for the organisation. You're pulling different directions, you're not working together. So for me, the future skills are in the communication, the emotional intelligence, and the collaboration. So I hope that kind of, hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of an oversight in terms of what I think that future employers are going from my experience, James, as well as from talking to CEOs and others. And obviously I could probably talk on this all day because it's something that I'm really passionate about. But essentially I've now moved just briefly into I now work as an employment lawyer, but I also have set up my own business called Pursuit of Growth, which is looking at ways in which I can assist the education sector in inspiring young children and young adults to find people that have done things without qualifications or without the normal qualifications. So there's different paths can be seen as a benefit. I don't see the benefit in kind of pigeonholing children from a very young age. And that's something that I don't necessarily think that that happened to me, but it's definitely my recollection is that those paths were given to me as the options, and there was never a different option given to me. So, and all the way through my career, it's been, I'm a lawyer. And so all the things that I've done have veered from, can a lawyer do that? Can a solicitor do that? Whereas actually, I'm not, I'm a person. And that's first and foremost. And now I'm a mum, and I'm a mum to a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. And I don't necessarily want those two girls to have the same as I did. I want them, they're very different girls, they're very different characters, they have different strengths to bring to the party. And so in the same way that you have different strengths in your head teacher team, your SLT, your children's peer groups, that, you know, children from a very young age also exhibit those strengths, and it's about building on those strengths, not showing them the weaknesses. So it's about all of that character building, as you were saying, Chris, in taking it ahead.
Yeah, I'd react. As you said that last piece, there were just nods all around the room, and I think what you said has resonated with lots of people in here, and I think, you know, lots of us would totally agree. And you know that actually we need to refocus on the skills that we are giving our children. I can't help that you use the word passion in there, and I'll sort of tie that to Jasmine's input and you know, the Ikigai framework, you know, which we use a lot across Heads Up, but this, you know, this notion of sort of mission and passion and vocation. And I reflect on my own journey. It's, you know, it's taken me probably, you don't necessarily have that when you're 15, 16, but it's something that develops. It's interesting listening to Jasmine and then listening to you and listening to Joe and listening to Colin. You're all doing something that you clearly feel really passionately about. You know, and ultimately it comes back to being, as you said, Rhian, it comes back to being human. We are human beings, and most human beings want to have an impact on the world around them. Whatever that sphere of influence can be, and for some it's not, you know, it's quite a small sphere of influence, but we want to, you know, everybody in this room wants to help people. That's our passion, that's our mission, that's what we do, that's what we're about. And I think actually spending a bit of time looking at that with young people in the school setting. Actually, what are you passionate about? What are you good at? What do you love? You know, what do you want to do? What change do you want to bring to the world around you? And using that Ikigai framework would be no bad way to go, actually, for young people and careers advice moving forward. Does anybody else want to sort of respond to anything that any of our speakers have said so far? Is there anybody, it might just be a shout out, you might just be celebrating something that you've heard, you might have a question, you might have a reflection, but I'm also loving the idea of hearing about people's personal career stories. How did you end up doing what you're doing at the moment? How did you land there? I'll open it up to the floor.
I'm just going to pull Julia up because she's put a great story in the chat, and then I realised it only went to me. But I feel like it's one worth sharing. Go on, Julia. It's awesome.
This is so embarrassing.
I'm not sure it's relevant, but it's awesome.
Colin's going to think of me after my revelation about jumping out of cupboards either, but there we go. This is kind of how I rock. It does resonate actually, because I was at secondary school, and it kind of shows something about what I was at an all girls high school, and similar to now really, there weren't enough rooms, so we were doing history, and it was the home economics link. Home economics kind of brings back bad memories for me, but this is one of them. So we were in the home economics room for history because we couldn't go in the history block or whatever it was. But quite a few of us hadn't done our homework. So I convinced everybody, you could call it innovation, I suppose, or something anyway. I convinced everybody in the class that it would be a good idea just to hide the history books in one of the ovens while the teacher was doing something else. So we did. But the big problem was about 10 minutes later, the home ec teacher came in the room to put the ovens on in preparation for the next lesson. So we were all sat there knowing our books were in one of these ovens that had come on, getting used to the really nice smell of crispy paper before we had actually owned up. So yeah, that was my revelation when you talked about home economics teachers. But if we think about it in a wider sense, in terms of how we felt within school and what really mattered and everything else, you know, it brings back that idea of humanity, and the idea that the children we're talking about are actual humans with senses of humour, humans with, you know, living, breathing people who need to be appreciated, I guess, and that probably can solve so many more problems than we can. And I guess that's what has hit me in my kind of unique position at the moment as an observer, in terms of what we, you know, everybody's making decisions about these children who allegedly have got gaps. And I kind of like to posit the idea that some of the children that we consider to have come from disadvantaged backgrounds, with, you know, putting my working class sort of hat on now, might not be the most disadvantaged in all of this, and may have learned an awful lot, and it's time for us to listen to them too. So the work in terms of internship, in terms of showing them the world of work and seeing what they've got to contribute is massive. And that kind of comes from, I was so fortunate to go on a research trip to New York a few years ago, where we looked at the Title I funded schools, which in our speak is probably the closest to pupil premium schools that we could visit. And to see the work that corporates, I mean, New York has got a lot of corporates, you know, and an awful lot of money, but to see the work they were doing with their most disadvantaged students was just phenomenal. You know, and the EQ stuff, all the emotional, because they had counsellors on site. They had all, I mean, if anybody's come across Barbara McEwen, who did some work over here a little while ago, talking about what she did with her Champions project, was just phenomenal. You know, and we've a lot to learn from that sort of stuff that was going on 6-7 years ago, really. So yeah, so that all came from a story about books in the oven, but.
Yeah, and I think that the human point is something that we keep coming back to, you know, at Heads Up, and both in terms of us as head teachers and leaders in the system, but also for the young people in our schools. And I think often one of the perhaps traps that we fall into with education more broadly is talking about preparing people for the future. And Julia, you know, what you've just said is a brilliant reminder that they are actually living a life right now. Colin, I think you and I talked about this earlier on, but actually that, you know, we can talk about, yes, you know, what they're doing is important potentially to inform what they do in the future, but ultimately it's about the life that, you know, the human beings that they are at the moment, and how we're enriching them, and the humor and the fun and the jokes and the difficulties and the sadness and the upset and all of those sort of things that they're dealing with. So actually we need to recognize that we are preparing them for the future, but I just wonder whether we've become so future focused on behalf of our young people that we don't allow them to live in the moment in school. We don't allow them to enjoy the point at which they're at, because everything's about getting ready for life. Everything's about getting ready for work. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, what about what they're doing now? So I think, you know, that very human story, I think, is a great anchor for us to remember that we're talking about human beings, and we're talking about human beings with all of their fascinating complexity. And actually, you know, what they go on to do will be as fascinatingly complex as what they're doing as young people.
In terms of thinking, I've done a lot of work talking to children about what they see learning, what learning means to them and what it is. So it's that relevance of what am I doing now? You know, a lot of children, the first time you ask them is so I can get a job in the future. Well, actually, that is beyond their, especially if you're to a 6-year-old, that's totally beyond their comprehension. Why is it important you learn that now? What are you learning it for? And it never fails to astound me the amount of children that I've spoken to that can't comprehend why am I learning it for now. You know, and in one of the courses I've looked at recently, I came across the PK Young School in America. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but they interviewed the architect about this school, and this school was created with the community in mind, so that children didn't see learning as an institutional aspect to their lives that just happened at, and even that thing where they see the teacher out and about and wonder why you're not at school. The idea that they see their learning as a cohesive part of their lives. And I guess that would be my hope, that when children come back, that actually all learning's learning. It's not about what you do in the classroom or what you do at home. It's all learning, and it's relevant to how you live right now. Yeah, sorry, I've got my soapbox.
Thank you, Julia. Jasmine.
I just wanted to say that actually, you're right, what we think about at 16 doesn't always work out, but actually it's okay. And I think we underestimate how much we have transferable skills, and we need to model that. And I'll give you an example is, as a result of, I thought I'd be teaching till 65 and probably teaching with a Zimmer frame. But death happened. And then what happened was I became a foster carer. And the other thing I do is, and I just want to tell you out there that it's good for us to have plans A, B, and C, because we need to model that. So I recruit detectives and police officers for the College of Policing and the Met Police. That's interesting. The other thing, I'm a vice chair of Gingerbread. And I sit there and I think 5 years ago, and there's a couple of other things I do, honestly, I don't want to bore you with it. But 5 years ago, I sat there racking my brains thinking, how the hell am I going to replicate the salary of a deputy head, and still make the mortgage pay? And I think it's a really important lesson for children and all of us to say that it's okay. And it's a Yabusak's word that I'm going to use there, cognitively divergent. And it just sounds so pompous, but we are cognitively divergent, and we need to make sure that children understand that. And whatever we do in life, if we have a setback, and 5 years ago when I had to turn down the headship, letters had gone out, everything had gone out, and I just had to sign the contract. Imagine the one thing that I wanted and I couldn't have because I needed to focus on my family. But you turn it around, and it's the very characteristics of effective learning that we go back to the early years, the resilience, the curiosity. Yes, it has had to be treading on water, but I look back and my life is much richer now. Yeah, and I don't forget my days in the classroom. And yes, I do write blogs and stuff like that. But I always used to go back to teaching. Sometimes I used to do supply just to go, actually, I don't want to be an ivory tower academic. I do want to go in and see what that teacher's feeling. And all of those skills. And the one thing that we need to get better at doing as educators is making connections and making them sincere and authentic and helping each other. And you see it when I go to work for the College of Policing and the Met Police. We're all kind of rookies and we're all working. It's like going to school with going to work with your best mates, but we're all freelancers. We all help each other and give opportunities. I'm not sure whether education has still created that. And I'm hoping a forum like this will do, where, hang on a second, I know someone who can do and whatever. And we need to get better about that. And the other thing we need to get better about is wherever you are, whatever staff, whether you're based in school or in an organisation or local authorities, give people the chance to have those plans A, B, and C. Because we talk about retention and we talk about all of those things, but actually retention is when you actually encourage people to live a life and live a happy life. And that work is just a tool or a mechanism to create that. And that's how people are going to retain people. That's it, full stop.
Yeah, completely agree with you, Jasmine. And I'm looking at that lens. I think Rianne just put something in the chat about your oldest child. My oldest daughter is in year 11, so she's had a hugely disrupted 11 months. GCSE results, etc., etc., etc. We've had lots of conversations about what she's going to do. She's never really loved school, which is slightly annoying for two parents who are both teachers. That's like, oh, okay, that's slightly tricky. So she's never been a big fan of school. She's never been a big fan of learning, and yet she's sort of falling. She's, you know, about sort of 6-7 months ago, which sixth form college am I going to go to, Dad? Shall I stay where I am? Shall I go to a new one? Anyway, we're now further along with that journey, and she's sort of reflecting on and the conversations we're having. I said to her the other day, Emily, do you know what? I really don't mind what you do as long as you're happy doing it. And I think, you know, that's the point for me. It's about actually whether you're 16 or indeed, as I am, 48. And as I was, like you, Jasmine, 44 4 years ago, having to go, right, sorry, 46 2 years ago, having to go, right, I'm going to have to redefine my career. Actually, it's not the linear journey that we present to children. It's this complex zigzagging all over the place. And as you say, it's the transferable skills that we have with us that enable us to navigate that choppy water. Sometimes choppy, sometimes really calm, and the sun's shining and it's beautiful. But occasionally it's not. And I think, you know, that would be my reflection through the eyes of my daughter, but also my own, is that, you know, I wish for a world where we just appreciated all of the variable pathways that are available, and we celebrated all of the chances that children can have. Anybody else want to share their career path? Or Joe, do you want to come back in on that?
Sorry, yeah. So I can join you with that one. I never for a second thought I'd go into education, and neither did my friends or family. I think they were speechless, and it's not often that they are. But yeah, I really did enjoy school, actually, more for the social side of things, should I say. But I did enjoy school, and I was I enjoyed very much the creative aspect of it, alongside English. And I did feel I had the pressure from my dad more so to go in to be a lawyer, or, you know, my brother to be an optician, and that's kind of what was the seed that was going on behind you know, in the background. And like I said earlier on, I never knew what I actually wanted to do at all, and I never had that guidance at school either. Now, my mum was a head teacher, and she's now retired, but back when I did my A-levels, because at first I was thinking maybe I might go down a vocational route, and then last minute I decided, no, I'm going to stay on at sixth form, complete my A-levels, did history, English and art, and general studies, so I had a sort of broad option there. And then the day of the deadline for apply to university, UCAS, I didn't have a clue, and I was like, oh my God, what should I do? And I literally put down a PR course at Leeds University. I thought, no, do you know what, something I could do, but I just didn't look into it much. Started it in the September, got to December, absolutely detested the course. It just really did, and I was one of many in a line that dropped out. So, but I just didn't think it was for me either, and I brushed it. And then I decided to have that year as a gap year, and I did various jobs. And it was a great learning sort of curve for me as well, to give me that space to actually think carefully about my next steps, what I wanted to do. And then it was that point I decided, right, I really do, I'm passionate about art. So I decided to go to Leeds College of Art and Design, and I did a foundation there. And then I decided to progress on and complete a fashion design degree at Leeds University. And it was actually the making of me at that point. I really, really, really enjoyed it. Really passionate about learning, and had a real insight into part of my modules with Spanish as well, and CAD. So I had, various skill sets from that. And in my final year there, my mum rung me, said, Joanna, get out of bed. I need you to come to school. I've got a year 11. There's a really challenging school in the inner city Leeds. And she said, I've got a class that have got no teacher. She's on long-term sick, textiles girls. Just come in and help them. It's your specialism. You'll be able to help them more than rather than a supply teacher who's not specialised in your subject. So I went in as an unqualified teacher. The rest is history. And difficult 15 girls in there. So challenging, but I thought, bring it on. The more challenging they are, the more I loved it. And then I went on and completed my QTS, and there you go. But I never for a second thought I'd go into teaching, and I'd never change it for a second. I really wouldn't. So yeah, there you go. And I think that's why I'm really passionate about making sure that we support all the schools within our trust to think carefully about how they weave organically the careers aspect, but also in terms of qualifications and routes and opportunities, and that career progressions, but earlier on, more so than what I actually had. I was informed to have. And I know from that impact over the years, even before the new Ofsted framework, it's not about that. It's had such, a positive impact on students' lives. And like what we're currently doing at the minute with the post-16 provision, which we'll get our first cohort next September, it's not about one size fits all. There's a cohort of students who have got EHCPs, and going to a mainstream college isn't for them at this point in their life, nor is the world of work and apprenticeship. So actually creating a platform for students which does meet their needs and it tailors it in, is paramount, but giving them those fundamental life skills. So it's not about actually the students getting that qualification, which is an ASDAN COPE qualification and enterprise, but it's actually about giving them the life skills and the opportunity to actually think carefully about what they want to do next, and giving them that opportunity to progress into different sectors and different routes like apprenticeships or staying on and doing further qualifications at the college. But very much so, yeah.
Brilliant.
I think it's also really important as well. One thing as an ex-secondary design and technology teacher is I didn't understand why, when I went into as an NQT, why the school that I was in, an inner city school in Bradford, they were teaching and they were using computer software. Actually, they don't use in industry. So going back to the previous conversations, you're skilling these students that actually when they go into the real world of work, they haven't got those skill sets. And likewise, my husband is an architect, and the current practice that he's working at, they've been recruiting so many new architects. They're actually inundated with work, which is brilliant in this current climate. But he's saying they're coming in, and he's trying to do his work and train all these staff because they're coming in from out of university, and they haven't been actually exposed to the correct software. So they're not actually, being able to fulfill the positions as it stands, the workload. So it is very much about making sure that the curriculum framework is mapped out, and actually the facilities and what the students are actually learning and that skill set is applied into the real world. And it's those connections, isn't it, in terms of knowing what, I know I'm going off tangent, but knowing what actually is out there and what industries are using to then upskill the students. So it's very competitive as well, isn't it? And then obviously, ultimately, that boosts the students' confidence as well.
All recognizing that you're not necessarily going to be able to ever keep pace, and therefore using, as you said earlier on, using local businesses and the resources that they have available, recognizing that you're never necessarily going to be able to keep your DT department equipped to the level and standard of local engineering companies. So actually, how can you use those local engineering companies to enrich the experience of your people?
And very much about work placements rather than I had to do a 2-week work placement in year 10, and it was meaningless in lots of ways. It needs to be, again, one size doesn't fit all, and it, very much about when you do it. So over the years, when I stopped, since I've been an SLT, but when I stopped actually having my own classes 5 years ago, there's a student in there, and he wanted to become an architect. And in his own time, I actually organised for him to go in the spring bank holiday, and he was committed to that, losing his holiday. But he actually went and did a work placement to see if he wanted to do it, and he wasn't sure afterwards. So actually, I think about making sure and giving students the opportunity to have quality, meaningful impact work placements earlier on as well. So it helps inform them actually making decisions about career pathways.
Yeah, totally agree. And that makes me think that sort of TJ and Colin, you've referenced TJ's interview with Jim Knight. Did Jim talk about School 42 in that interview, TJ?
Is that the school?
So yeah, it's a school based in Paris, and it's been set up. I mean, it's a very, very radically different model. But it's a school that's been set up in Paris, and the premise is that they get young people into the school, and there is very little in the way of curriculum. They just allow those children to explore things that interest them. There's loads of resources that are available, and they just go into this very exploratory mode. And then what they do is that as the children start to do that exploration, they start to really hone in on what they're good at and what they love. So coming back to sort of Ikigai framework, they then start to build the curriculum around those children. But there's no sort of expectation of previous sort of qualifications or prior attainment or prior ability. It's very much set up in such a way that those children can explore, and then they start to build the pathway in front of them, even though that might lead them into something, it's very radically different. But it might be, if that sort of thing really interests you, it'd be worth going and having a look. I don't know all of the details about it, but yeah, School 42 in Paris, which is a model now which is expanding out across the world. So they're opening up other School 42s in other places, but just taking this really radically different approach with it. And so worth taking a look at that if that interests you. Anybody else want to share their career experiences, or their Kate's just put a question in about work experience, quality work experiences that people may have had. Any other reflections or thoughts beyond that as well on the things that we've been talking about this evening?
Just briefly.
I was going to ask if it still, no, Kelly, I was going to ask if it still happens. Does that still happen in school? Do they still offer work experience in year 10, year 11? I don't know.
No, to be honest with you, at my previous trust, outstanding trust, they stopped basically doing it, which is why one of my ex-students, he's like, no, I'll do it in the holidays. So they stopped doing it, which I think is an absolute shame. To be honest with you, it gives you, it stops. I mean, I never turn back the time and have any regret. But had I have had the opportunities that our current students have, maybe I wouldn't have rushed and just applied for PR and then basically, in a sense, wasted a year. I didn't waste the year anymore. I see it very differently, and it's made me who I am today and where I am. But I think, it's work placements are really key. It helps you shape in terms of actually the sense of direction and what you need to achieve to get there, or if it's not for you, rather than actually being in the situation that I was in. So I mean, I know some schools do it. At your school, James, you still have it? Secondary, you still have the
no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not in the school anymore. But yeah, I didn't in my school.
You did
when we were there. No, we didn't. We'd stopped. Well, actually, we did, but we didn't have it in that really fixed sense at the end of year 10. So what we defined it as is that there had to be an opportunity at some point between them turning 14 and them then leaving school. There had to be a week or 2 weeks really rich. So we were working towards a Gatsby benchmark. So, a week or 2 weeks of really rich work experience, but actually it didn't also have to be in school time. Because again, there's another good example of this really artificial construct that, to make things easier for us, we do it like this. So we'll have a work experience week in July of year 10. 30 of the other schools locally also do the same thing. And actually all of the children are going to the same work experience places. So, sorry, I mean, I don't know if anybody's very inappropriate. I can't believe it's sort of 10 years old, but the In-Betweeners sketch where they go off to get their work placements, if anybody's seen that, in the end, he wants to go off and work at a local newspaper, and he ends up working at the local garage, and that's the real life work experience for many of our young people. They just end up in completely the wrong place because there is no other work experience, and again, that's an example of the system systemizing work experience, and in the process us losing the heart of what work experience is actually all about. So it's another example of that. But yeah, we tried to do it differently. How successful we are or not, I don't know. But
your career's got to then tally up with your offer, your pathway, your key stage 4, your key stage 5, and again, going back to the original sort of question of the topic, you've got to give students a broad range of opportunities and options and pathways, don't you, and not narrow it down to just GCSEs. It's really
fabulous. Thank you, Kelly. I think you were going to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that basically, you know, I often ask my staff, why are you here? So I really like what you were saying earlier about sort of aligning, you know, employment division and values and sort of core sets. But from my personal perspective, it's life experience that have led me to where I am now, because obviously in school, believe it or not, I was quite introvert. I was very shy, frightened of my own shadow at some points. But then I followed my, you know, careers Wales path, when you do your algorithm and you put in your details, and they generated a secretary for me. So I did try to pursue that path, but it wasn't for me. But it was 2 car accidents that left me in a wheelchair for 18 months, in honesty, which led me to sort of realign, what do I actually want to do? What, you know, what am I about? Which I'm about, like Rian said earlier, making a difference. So that gave me that, and I often think that that's where my resilience comes from as well, because when you're learning to walk again, when you've got to go through that sort of battle and that you know, that will and that drive, then nothing really seems difficult. So, you know, I think that what I'm trying to say is that life experience, as awful as it was, has actually shaped my life now, and has enabled me to push myself outside of my comfort zone, and actually be in the position that I'm in now. So yeah, not that I would wish that on anyone, obviously, of course, but it is just saying that those opportunities and those things, they build our sort of core values and our perceptions, and by us, you know, giving children these experiences of being able to connect with industry, and in being able to have these people that give them aspirations. And, you know, I grew up in a Valleys community, you know, very limited aspirations as well, from a low income family, but it's teachers that have inspired me, is meeting doctors and nurses and people that I can actually, you know, think, oh, you know, it puts you outside of your box that you put on yourself, doesn't it? So yeah, it was just to share that, really. And I'm really, everything that, you know, that has been said today has really inspired me to want to bring that back and give my children that I teach those experiences now. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant, Kelly, thank you. And I think it's interesting, those of you that have shared your stories of where you are now and how you got there, sort of really resonates, Jasmine, with your statement from earlier on about, you know, we are an evolution, you know, and who we are is, you know, we are all evolving all of the time. And I think if that's the one key message that I would take away from this evening, and you know, to the schools that I talk with the sort of head teachers at the school that I work on, is to really hold on to that when we're thinking about the presentation of academic pathways and vocational pathways and career pathways, and just pathways, that actually we also frame that for the young people as one step and one stage in a constant evolution that is going to continue throughout the whole of their life, rather than this sort of set, you are about to embark on a set career path and off you go, and we'll see you at the end of it with your, you know, with your final salary pension at the age of 55. You know, that world is, for our young people, that world's gone forever. And I think if we can, for me, it all comes down to how we frame it with our young people. So we should be framing vocational options and non-academic programs of study, and not going to A-levels, with the same value and the same respect that we give to academic qualifications and academic pathways. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, we should be presenting it very much in this way, that, you know, this is a stage in what will be a constantly evolving career for you, and you'll have different jobs and you'll have different experiences. So enjoy it for what it is at this moment in time. Enjoy what you're doing at this moment in time, and there'll be difficult points in your future career, and there'll be easier points in your future career. But I think the way that we frame it to young people is really, really important, and we definitely need to step away from this linear path, and that's it. We've set you in the right direction for the rest of your life. I don't think it's as straightforward as that. Rian, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've thoroughly enjoyed this evening and the discussions that are going on, and it's so hopeful, I suppose, is the word that comes to mind about hearing all of this from all of you. But I think that the one thing that kind of comes out from here is all of your mindset. It is a can-do mindset, and I think that's something that we actually need to instill in our young people as well. So I know that earlier it was mentioned mindset's important. Actually, it really is, and we've seen about actually I've just seen Sarah written about the Squiggly Career podcast, which also I listen to, which is great. But we've seen the Carol Dweck and the growth mindset. I actually had the privilege of meeting Carol Dweck on one of her tours, but actually was utterly disappointed in how uninspiring she was as a person. And obviously this is going to go out on the web, so I have to be mindful of how I say it. But I believe that actually what she has done is actually interested people in the conversation and the education system in the idea of mindset, and for me that can only be applauded. So from that point of view, I think that her bringing it to life and starting that conversation is amazing, but also it needs to have a conversation, and it doesn't need its own "we're going to teach you growth mindset," because that's not a lesson. Actually, it's pervasive through life. It's something that you can nurture, that you can do in absolutely every subject session that you teach, and every topic based, no matter what end of the curriculum, from the lower primary all the way through to the extra. And it doesn't even need to be growth mindset. It just needs to be the different types of mindsets. So they've all got different names: success mindset, entrepreneur mindset, but effectively what it is explaining what your thoughts are, how you reframe your negative thoughts and overcome those challenges and the fear of failure and all of those into that one mindset kind of manual, if you like. So equipping our children for life and ourselves to a certain extent in that, to have the flexibility, whether it be the practical that Kelly was saying about that resilience of getting up and walking again, or whether it's the cognitive that Jasmine was talking about, the flexibility of actually managing your own expectations as well as others around you. That's so important. So I think for me, I'm absolutely loving the conversation and the can-do attitude, and I think that if we can pass that on and inspire the younger generation, that'd be amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rhiannon. And again, lots of nods around the room as you were saying that, and I think, Jasmine, you've also put something in there about, you know, if the pandemic's shown us anything about the complexity of our society and the richness of different jobs and careers and vocations that exist in our society, is that actually they are all valued and they are all of high value. You know, and certainly the key worker theme throughout the pandemic highlighted that for everyone. You know, we like to think that we're all sort of egotistically important in our own way and the thing that we do, but we are all reliant on each other, and we're reliant on the skill sets that our community bring to the table, as rich and diverse as all of those skill sets are. And that's, you know, I would hope that that's a lesson that we can hold on to. I kind of think that we've already lost it in some regards. It felt very prevalent at the beginning of the lockdown back in sort of April, May time last year, but I can't help but feeling that feeling of value and the roles that people play in our society has already been lost to some extent. But I would hope that it's something that as many of us can hold on to as possible, because I think that's really important. We're at 8:21. So unless anybody has a sort of burning desire to share anything further about their own career experience and their own pathway to where they're sat at the moment, I think I'm going to wrap it up. So I'm going to start wrapping it up by extending a huge thanks to Rhiannon and Joe for joining us this evening and giving us their perspectives and sparking the conversation. Let's have a big heads up round of applause for the two of them, please. We're really delighted that you've been able to join our community this evening. And we will, fortunately, because this is recorded, we can share it with the other head teachers in our community as